let's move into the review. Ladies and gentlemen, today we are reviewing Settlements of Everdell.
No, Tom. It's Households of Mjolnir.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Start again. Domiciles of Dominion is a 2020 release. Basically 2021 release, though. I don't know.
Barnyards of Elfland.
Apartments of Avalon is is out today.
I feel like this was one of those like name generators, like a Wu-Tang name generator or like a Lord of the Rings name generator. They just went to board game name generator.
Yes.
And they got Dwellings of Eldervale.
Fantasy light Euro name generator. You look it up and you get right there. And it was between Dwellings of Eldervale and Condos of Catan. And I think they made the right choice in that one very limited sense. I mean, can we start with how horrible a name it is? It's so bad. It's so.
Regardless of our review, this gives nothing about our review. I'm going to say right now, this is the best game with the worst name ever made.
Now, what you're saying is that let's suppose there was a game that had a meh name. The game would have to. It's the relationship between how bad one is to how good the other one is.
Between the name and the quality of the game is unparalleled in any other game.
I can kind of agree with you because the name is straight up trash. I mean, first of all, Everdell is a huge hit, big, huge seller. So you name a game Eldervale when Everdell is pumping out, sequel after sequel and all that sort of stuff. I'm like, what is going on here?
Yeah. Let
me give you the tail of the tape. Dwellings of Eldervale, technically, Board Game Geek calls it a 2020 game. Nobody we know that has seen it since 2021. The designer is Luca Lori. The artists are Sergio Chavez, Anton Fadiv, Lisa Hannigan, Irina Kuzmina, and several others. And the publisher is Breaking Bad Games. It looks like it's supposed to play in 60 to 150 minutes. The weight on BGG is 3.2 right now. I feel like that's a little
I think it's just Breaking Games, Tom. It's not Breaking Bad Games.
It is Breaking Games. You're right.
I was like, did they really get away with that in IP? I don't think so.
That would be amazing.
Breaking Games.
Dude, that would be amazing. The weight is 3.2. I do not agree with that weight. I
Well, it depends. It depends on what you're playing with. There's a lot of modules.
Maybe. I can see why there's something that makes this game much lighter than that, and there are some things about the game that make that rating correct. So we can get into that. Maddie, tell us about Dwellings of Eldervale.
Well, much like Marvel United, this had me at nothing. I saw, I think, a Dice Tower review, and I was just like, nah. I remember when I saw it on Kickstarter, and I was just like, nah. You're all seeing how judgmental I am today, which I hide very well in this podcast, I think. But I as the enthusiastic gamer, but I am very judgmental, and probably need to work on that. And as my judging things by their book cover. But yeah, this one I went, nah. I looked at the designer, and I was like, oh. Luke Laurie, I really like Manhattan Project Energy Empire. I actually love that game. I think that game's great.
It is.
But when I saw this, I was like, all right, good for him. He's going to make some money. But probably not for me. I just saw minis. It just looked like I saw dice. I saw six-sided dice with pips on them, not even symbols. Like it was just normal dice. I don't know. It
really
just
phoning it in, Luke.
Yeah, looks like nothing to me. But then I saw some solo reviews once the game had been delivered through Kickstarter, and everyone was saying that the solo game was amazing. So that makes me perk up because then I go, well, maybe it's fantastic. It's a solo game. So I read the rule book, and as I'm reading the rule book, I went, well, this seems pretty great. And then I played it online as a solo game, and I went, this is really good. And then I was like, I wonder if the multiplayer is good. And I played it multiplayer, and I was like, oh, no, this is totally solid. I really enjoy this. And then I went and bought a copy. And I was surprised. Why don't you tell us what you think of this game before we
what I think about the game or what the game's about?
Yeah, so why don't you explain the game? Yeah,
sure. Okay, Dwellings of Eldervale is a situation in which we are one of 16 different races in a fantasy realm.
Think Terra Mystica.
Yeah, think Terra Mystica. The board is not a board at all. It is actually much like Eclipse. It is a series of hexes that are going to be flipped up and placed around. There are hexes of two types. There are brownish hexes, which everybody can go to and have very, very important functions. Things like the dungeon.
Those are called ruins, I believe.
Yeah, dungeons or the mage tower or places like that, which have very specific purposes. And then there are the elemental realms. When you pick one of the 16 different races in the game, they break down into 8 different elements. The elements can be earth, air, water, fire, chaos, order, so on and so forth.
Light, dark, yeah, things like that.
Light, dark, exactly right. I think that's, matter of fact, I think that's all 8 of them. So when you pick one of your realms, there are 3 elemental terrains that belong to your type, and those go into the game and are shuffled in as well. A board is laid out, and the game could not be more simple on a certain level. You have 6 workers. You have 3 special pieces. You have a warrior, a wizard, and a dragon. And you start off with 3 workers available for use. And you're going to take those workers one at a time, and you're going to place them out into a territory. And when you place them into a territory, you get to do what that territory does. Period.
Yeah, very simple worker placement.
Yeah.
Take a worker, put it down, do what it says on the spot.
Exactly. The trick comes in the ways that things are scored, because there's a lot of different ways you can score. But one of the things is that these workers can be transformed. There are these little roofs that can be placed on top of them to turn them from workers into settlements or dwellings, as it were.
Yes.
And
it's all about the cones.
Yes. There is a ancillary board that is an elemental track, where by doing various things like putting dwellings into certain territories or grabbing adventure cards from the deck, you are going to be able to move up these elemental tracks, much like Terra Mystica. And by moving up those things, that's points at the end of the game. So if I'm 4 points up on the fire track, I'm going to get 4 points at the end of the game. Plus, I'm going to get 4 points for every dwelling I have in a fire realm. Plus, I'm going to get 4 points for every card I have in front of me that is a fire card, and so on and so forth. So, in a very simple and elegant way, you are going to you're going to use the points that you've scored on the elemental track to be a multiplier for all of the other things you've gotten in the game.
It scores very similarly to Concordia in that sense, and that's you're going to be multiplying your score by the cards you have in certain suits, so to say. It's much like Concordia has suits.
Correct.
And you are going to want to start specifying at some point to collecting a lot of those and building houses in matching colors as well. And yeah, like that. So, and to me, that was one of the first things that Trey pointed out that I thought was astute, was that the scoring is very similar to Concordia.
It is, yeah. But then it starts to get, so that's the Euro part of the game. Now let's talk about the non-Euro part of the game. I mentioned that each player picks a color, right? Picks a race, and the race has a color, a element. 3 of your tiles go into the deck. Well, one of your tiles is not a normal tile. It is a lair, because your realm has a monster in it. And when that comes up, that monster goes on the board. If you're like Maddie and you just throw your money into the street, then you have beautiful miniatures, possibly even on bases that make sounds. Is that what you have, Maddie?
I do have the legendary version, which yes, has sound bases that are hilarious and literally the dumbest thing ever added to a Kickstarter, but so dumb that they're kind of funny. And kind of like, it's the dumbest, most unnecessary thing I've ever seen, except there is one gameplay use of it. Like if you control a monster, there's certain ways to actually like gain control of a monster. It becomes one of your pieces. It actually is a good way of differentiating that you control it and that it's not still a monster. But other than that, they are totally ridiculous. But the reason that I like the legendary is that it comes with 20 monsters instead of 10, 2 for each color, and they all play very differently. So that's just a way of adding a lot of variety to the game.
Or you could be like me, and you have cardboard standees of these.
Totally fine. Plays the same.
Monsters.
Just the only difference is a couple less expansion tiles, and you have 10 monsters instead of 20.
They felt a little grandiose for me, so I took the standees and I just threw them away. And what I use is pawns.
You just used rocks.
Pawns from Parcheesi is what I used. There were enough different colors of Parcheesi so that I was able to do that. It just felt more like a game to me.
I guess 16 monsters and not 20. 16.
Correct,
right.
because it's at 8, right? Anyway, these monsters inhabit their lair, but if you wander into a territory next to that monster is going to come and he's going to attack you. Sometimes,
depending on the monster. Yeah,
correct. And then and you also have other players. You can move into another player's territory. If you do, you still get to take the action of that territory. But then after that, there's going to be fisticuffs. There's going to be a fight. And the fight could not be more simple to resolve. First thing, which is cool, is that people that are in neighboring territories can hear there's a battle of brewing and can decide that they want to come in and join or not join. Dragons tend to roll 3 dice. Warriors tend to roll 2 dice. Everyone else tends to roll 1 die. You add up all the dice. You add swords, which is one of the economy elements that you have in the game, and roll as many dice as you've accumulated. And the way it resolves is super simple. If only one person has a 6, that person wins that battle. If more than one person has a 6,
well, whoever has the highest, if you have a higher die than
correct.
Anybody else, you automatically win no matter how many dice you rolled.
Precisely right. And if 2 people are tied with the highest die, then you go to the second highest die, and so on and so forth. Really simple, really elegant.
It almost reminds me of like something like you would describe in like Warlord or something. It seems like something designed in the 70s, like of just the most old school, simple combat system.
Well, it is. It's dice pooling, which was a tabletop RPG method back in the Vampire the Masquerade era and things like that, where you would do things like that. Warhammer. There are a lot of games that use dice pooling, and some of them have systems that are very, very similar to this. The good thing about it is that it's chartable. It is very predictable. Like, as a matter of fact, I believe there even is a chart in the game which says, hey, if you're rolling 4 dice and the other guy's rolling 3 dice, they have a 75% chance or you have a 75% chance of winning. Right?
Of course, you can roll 1 die and roll a 6, and the other person can roll 6 die and roll 6 ones. That can happen.
It's funny that you should mention that, because I did roll 6 dice yesterday, and my highest roll was a 3.
Mm-hmm.
That was fun.
Absolutely. Totally can happen.
Super love that. So that's, I guess if we had to say, there are also magic cards. You start off with 5 magic cards. Some of these are instants where you just get to do things like add 2 more dice to a combat, or put a person into a region that would start a combat, but now it doesn't start a combat. Or
I think the most valuable card in the deck, there is no combat card.
Yes. Really, really interesting things. There are plagues where everybody in Eldervale has to go to the underworld. By the way, let's say this: victory and defeat in these battles is not a huge deal, really. There are good things.
It depends, but yeah.
But for the most part, winning a battle gets you a boon, gets you a bonus. You move up
you get swords.
A track.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. If you win, right?
Yes.
If you win, you get to move up. Yeah.
And if you lose, you get a sword. So
But the biggest downside is that, and that leads us into what I think is the most interesting part of this game, is that there is worker unplacement as well, which I don't think I've ever seen before. So you place your workers, but then when you pull them off, you add them to a tableau of cards that you've hopefully been building throughout the game that are new action spaces that only you can go to. But any warriors that are in the dungeon that have lost to battles cannot be placed on those, which to me is the biggest detriment of losing a battle.
Correct.
Is that, especially if you've built a large tableau, then you have found yourself in a place where you are not going to be able to activate all of the worker placement spots that you've so carefully cultivated. But if you've so carefully cultivated a lot of action spots, you should be doing everything you can to avoid battles.
Yeah, in a lot of cases, or collect magic cards, and so you have cards that are raised dead, where all of a sudden the guys coming out of the underworld don't have to, can still be used in that sense. The way to think about it is, it's almost like they've come up with a much more interesting income round.
Mm-hmm.
Right, that's really what it is. It's an income
Super
round
fun, super interesting part of the
you
game.
you pull all your pieces back and you get income. But in this case, the income is highly variable depending on the cards that you've gotten and what you're placing on those cards, because a lot of these cards have spaces for square tiles that are going to give you variable bonuses depending on what you put there.
Yeah. And everybody starts with 3 workers and 3 private worker placement spots that they can pull them back onto after they've placed them all. And those are, build more workers, build a dwelling, which we'll talk about as an important action, or get some income. Yeah, get some resources.
Yeah. Yeah. What else do we need to tell them about the?
Well, let's talk about the tableau building, because to me that's a really fun part of the game. So when you play the game, you play, like we said, with a certain number of elements in the game. That's the elements that players are playing, plus a certain amount of other random ones thrown in. And that's how many decks of adventure cards you play in. And there's a really lovely game trays designed thing that sits on your table that holds all of the different decks of cards. So there's a deck of card for every element. And there's one card that's the same for every deck, which is the door, which is usually the first one that you have access to buy, which is just going to give you a new worker placement spot that gives you potentially more resources when you pull your guys back into your tableau. But with the fun little thing of you get a bonus resource if you are the highest on the matching element chart, element track. But there are certain ways to build these cards. In the normal game, the only way to buy an adventure card, and they're quite expensive because, like we said, they're worth victory points. You get as many victory points for each adventure card that you own at the end of the game, equal to how far you are on that matching element track. So they're expensive to buy, but they're worth a lot of points, and they also can be used as engine building. So you're building this tableau of worker placement spots that you can use. There's also vault cards, which are a part of the adventure deck, and those are just straight up endgame points. So those can be worth having. They usually reward you for having a lot of a certain type of resource, sort of classic Euro style. You're going to get 2 points for every potion that you have at the end of the game, up to a max of 10 or whatever. So you're building a tableau of those, but in the normal game, every time you buy an adventure card, you're also expanding the map. You're also forced to place a new tile out on the map, which can add more monsters, can add more dwelling spaces, but also is the game timer. So the more people that are building their tableau, the shorter the game is going to be, which we'll talk about as the pros and cons of that, because I think there's a fun way to play with the Oracle tile, which gets around that. But the tableau building is really interesting to me. It's definitely feels engine buildy. Without the Oracle tile, it also feels shorter than it wants to be, because these games can end quickly. I mean, this can be 90 minutes and you feel like you just got your engine set up and then the game ends, because literally the thing that you're using to build your engine is also speeding the game up, which is cool from a design point because it can be a fast game. This is a 2-hour game with 4 people, I think, if people know how to play and there's not a lot of AP.
I've had a lot of AP in my games. We've gone a lot longer than that. But I purposely played with knowing what the game was. I wanted to play with the people in our game group that were the most casual gamers. So I played with people like Jake and people like Muscat and Bond, people that haven't played a lot of games. Okay. Because I think that's a great audience for this game. And,
sure.
But I did notice that they did a lot of thinking. They really studied the board and where.
Well, there's a lot of spatial puzzles here as well, because all of your workers have different placement rules. So and there's different rules depending on if you have workers on the board, because there's no set rounds here. It's not like, okay, everybody place their workers, then everybody pull their workers back. Everybody's going to have a different amount of workers, and you can decide to pull your workers back whenever you want, as long as you at least have one worker out on the board. So the rounds are very different. So there will be points in the game where you have no workers on the board because you've just pulled them all off in your last turn. And now you have different placement rules. So you must place in an empty space with your normal workers unless you have the warrior. And the warrior can be placed, if you have no other workers on the board, where there is somebody else. And the dragon can fly up to 2 spaces away. And and all the workers start breaking the rules. So there's a little bit of a learning curve there.
Yes, exactly. And let's mention that when you pick a different species to play, there are some small but subtle and sometimes profound differences in the way you play. And they say, well, your workers. I played the Atlanteans last time, and their deal was if you have 3 Atlanteans in Eldervale, Eldervale,
yeah.
In Catan.
Just remember Elder. That's how I remember it. We have a friend named Elder. He's on the podcast. Eldervale.
If you have 3 of your workers out when you recall them, when you bring them back, you get to go up the victory track, right? Which gives them very good benefits. So that was one of my powers. Another person played the Minotaurs, and his wizard could go into a place and not start a war, right? So secretly sneak into places and things like that. So each one, and these are powers that can really change the game in some very interesting ways. The asymmetry of it is...
I love the asymmetry. I think they've done a great job here because they're very simple differences.
Yeah.
It's not like I love Terra Mystica and Gaia Project, obviously, but to know the differences between the factions, you got to go over and look at the person's world and see, what their big buildings do. And, this is just, hey, my differences is when I die, I get 2 swords, or, you can be explained in 1 second. You kind of get them for the rest of the game. And I think but they feel profound. You feel it's one of those games where everybody reads their power and they all sound pretty broken.
Yeah.
Which I think is really fun. And there's 16 in the game. There's 2 for every thing, which to me is like, that's a huge amount of gameplay.
I think what you said is absolutely right. That variable player powers can be distracting because it's tough to know what everyone's special thing is. This one is everybody has 2 special things. The A and B, each one of them is 1 sentence long, and you get it. And sometimes you hear it and you're like, that doesn't seem very useful. And then a third of the way through the game, you're like, oh my God, why didn't I choose that? That's so great the way that's working in the game. They're very well thought out.
Yeah. Let's talk about randomness. You want to talk about randomness?
Yeah. So randomness in this game is there's a lot of randomness in this game, sort of. One thing is dice, right? You're rolling dice, but it's a very predictable pattern, right? Matter of fact, there's a chart that tells you what your odds of winning a battle are, depending on how many dice you have and how many dice the other person has. Magic cards. These magic cards are not all equal. Some are better than others. There are magic cards that you get that are endgame scorers. There are magic cards that have immediate effect and are tremendously useful. The adventure cards are going to be variable, and the tiles that are going to form the game board are highly variable too. And I played one game where my territory, my type of territory, all 3 of those tiles were buried toward the bottom of the deck, or at least only one came out in the early part of the game. That's a big handicap. That is a shockingly big handicap that you're not really prepared for. So there is randomness in this game. This is not, if you're looking for a game of long-term strategy that you can right out of the gate know what your strategy is going to be and pursue it ruthlessly, that is not this game. This is a game where you're going to have to make some decisions and change your point of view based on the variances that come, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And to me, the most important thing, if I was to tell somebody strategy in this game, is you need to make sure that you have at least 2, if not 3 dwellings. And fighting over dwellings, at the beginning of the game, you're like, who can afford these dwellings? Who cares? We all need cards. But at a certain point of the game, it becomes like Concordia in the map later on, where you start looking and going, oh, there's only like 2 or 3 places left that I can afford to place my houses down. And then everybody realizes that at the same point, and then it becomes a war. And so you need to start thinking about that from moment one in the game is, how am I going to get my houses down? And you can't guarantee you're going to get them because of battles. So
Yes.
let's say you put one of your workers there. Aha, at the end of my turn, when I pull my guys back, I'm going to build a dwelling there. Well, not if that guy's dead. And other people might try to move in and get there. And then you have to survive the round long enough in order to make sure you build a dwelling there.
Which is where
and
tactics chip comes in, right?
Tactics tokens, exactly. So that's what I'm building towards. So you could make sure you could do everything you can to put yourself in a position where you guarantee you need that. And you could have 6 dice against 1 and you can lose. And that to me is a kind of experience that I don't enjoy. So that to me is just like, I needed this place. And here's why you need these dwellings. It's not just points. The amount of adventure cards you have is limited by the amount of dwellings that you've built. You can have as many as you want. You can only score 3 adventure cards per dwelling that you have. So at the beginning of the game, you have none. So you will score no adventure cards until you build 1. So once you've got 1 dwelling down, now you can score 3 adventure cards. And if you're at the very top of that thing and it's 5 points, that's 15 points to you. So that 1 dwelling is now worth 15 points plus another 5 for the dwelling. So now that 1 dwelling becomes worth 20 points to you. Now, if you decide to get 3 more adventure cards, that's another 20 points. That's a lot of score. So you better make sure you get that second one down. It's very hard to have more than 9 adventure cards, especially if you're not playing with the Oracle. But even just getting 2 dwellings down at a certain point, if you haven't planned for it from moment 1, you're in trouble. And if you want to play like a Eurogamer and you want to make sure you get your tableau up quickly and fight over those good adventure cards, you're not going to be focused on building dwellings early, which is where the tactics tokens come into play. So one of the modules that comes with this game, and there's a handful of them, is something called tactics tokens, which is just a simple token that you have. I think it comes with every edition of the game. And when a battle happens, you can flip over your tactics token and say, you won the battle if you had lost, but my guys are staying.
In my
and then
version,
if you ever want to use that tactic token again, you're going to have to spend 3 swords to flip it back over. Now, what that does is it takes the importance off of fighting and puts it on timing. Yeah. Now, and there's a really interesting jockeying for timing thing here, because you can't build a dwelling with only 1 worker out, because you would need to pull that worker off in order to build a dwelling. So now you need at least 2 workers down to do it, unless, of course, you go to the lair tile where you can build there. You still need 2 workers for it, though, because you're going to turn one of your workers into the dwelling and lose it permanently. Right. So there's this really fun, I think, tactical and strategic jockeying for position that the tactic tokens allow. But you also have to pick your battles. You decide, like, you 3 swords. This is a lot of swords. You're going to need those swords. And also you could be using those swords for more dice. It doesn't just take away the luck factor. What it does is it makes you really choose your battles, choose them wisely. And when you say once or twice during the game, I cannot lose this guy because I need this position, yeah, you now have an option to make sure that happens. But you still have to win the timing war, because you still have to have planned it out right and strategized to the point where that, by the time your next turn comes around, you'll be able to turn that guy into a dwelling and not lose the opportunity.
There may be points where some of your opponents may have 5 or 6 pieces on the board, but everybody can pull their pieces back and do that, what I call sort of an income round, whenever you want. So figuring out when the board is going to be more empty or more available for you to put your pieces in certain places. Because when the board fills up, it's hard to avoid combat. Combat is
very hard.
Just about everywhere. The other thing is that there are 2 conditions that end the game. One is anybody builds all 6 of their dwellings. The second way is if the tiles that make up the map run out, and
it's exactly like Concordia.
Exactly.
Place all your buildings or go through the deck.
Exactly right. And the thing with that is that the dungeon, if you're not playing with the Oracle, the dungeon is where you put those tiles out. And the dungeon is also the only way, unless you're playing with the Oracle tile, that you can buy those adventure cards, which Matty was explained very well, are so important and so key to the game. So it's one of those things where, are you filling up the territory or are you expanding the territory? If you're filling up the territory, then you're going for a dwelling end game. If you are expanding the territory, then you're going for a tile end game, right?
Yeah, and if you're building dwellings, you are permanently losing workers, which is, as anybody who played a worker placement game, is really intense. I mean, you are losing not just the next action, but every round you're going to be losing action for the rest of the game. So a rush dwelling strategy is really, really hard to pull off because you'll be down to one worker, in 2 rounds.
It can be, yeah. It's a tricky thing. Though, what's interesting about the game is tempo. I think that's kind of a little bit of what you were talking about. Tempo was a really interesting thing because having a lot of workers is not as great as it is in most worker placement games because the retrieval of people, if you have a properly built tableau, even just a couple really good cards in your tableau are the equivalent of a mega action in and of themselves.
Yeah.
They're as good or better than any worker placement action in the game. So having a small number of people that you can tactically put out, quickly pull them back, get your rewards from that, can be a devastating strategy. And really consternating to people that are set up to have a big army that just want to battle people, right?
But also really hard to pull off, though, too, without tactics tokens, because I think this game suffers from a bash the loser as well. I mean, everybody's just going to start feeding off of the loser at some point because climbing up that glory track is fantastic. And if I can just pretty much stomp the loser every time they put a worker out, why wouldn't I? It's great for me. They're never going to be able to get a foothold back, which is basically leading me. I would never want to play this game without the tactics tokens. I don't. Yeah. I don't think it's a fun game for me. And I agree with you. It just limits the strategy so much, I think.
And I think the Oracle tile should be fairly mandatory as well because I think that having an alternate means of getting adventure cards without hastening game end, I think is key to the game.
Yeah, so the Oracle tile is literally just a new worker placement spot that starts in the board in addition to the dungeon that just lets you buy 1 adventure card, and that's it. It doesn't add a thing. Now, the dungeon tile allows you to buy 2, but you're speeding up the game timer by adding a tile. So the adventure, and it also the Oracle tile gives you an option: either buy an adventure card or take a magic card. And sometimes having a quick way to get another magic card can be really key too, because nobody wants to fight you if you have a handful of magic cards usually, which is also a great threat. Like if I've got 5 magic cards in my hand, you don't want to fight me because I've got some good stuff there. I could also just have I don't care, I don't leave this spot. And usually a lot of the important battles are in order to get you off that spot.
Right. So let's get to the review. We talked enough about it. I have to start by saying last night Jake was a real bully. Jake was kicking me when I was down. I was playing the Loving Atlanteans, which as a game power are not fighters. We are fish out of water, quite literally, in the game. And all he would do is wait until one of my pieces would come onto the board and then figure how to stomp me. And he was just, PTSD is a strong term for what I have this morning, but you just see Jake smiling at you with that little happy face. No, of course he didn't win.
Okay. Well, there you go.
But he made sure that I came in third. It was a great game. It was a lot of fun. So, all right. So you better talk first about your feeling about the game, because I think the crowd probably knows what you think, and what I think is probably a little more in question, right?
Yeah, sure. So I really enjoy this game. I think it is Fantasy Concordia. I think it is a really great. I would say it's a 3.0 in terms of the weight, and that's with tactics tokens and the Oracle. But I think it's a game much like Concordia that I'd be kind of happy to teach anybody, and I think it will draw in more people than Concordia based on the theme and the fun of it. Now, I also think it's a game that doesn't have a first great few plays. I think it's a game that really starts to shine after 3 or 4 plays when everybody, and I think it's a game that everybody kind of needs to treat as a strategic game and not a dice chucker. I think if you are going into this wanting to play an adventure game or a LARP game, I think I don't know. Personally, I think you can play it that way, and I think there can be an enjoyment in that. But I think you are overlooking the depth of the game and the actual the strength of the design, which I think pushes the players a little bit more towards treating this as a medium weight Euro. I think there's a lot to explore in the asymmetry. I think that there's massive innovation in worker placement here, which really surprised me. I really feel the puzzle of placing my workers is super interesting. Of how everybody has different rules of placement, how adjacency becomes so important. The map positioning is super important. And then there's a whole second phase of worker placement where I'm pulling my workers off onto a private tableau that I have built. And if you know me, you know I love tableau and engine building. And I really enjoy building this awesome engine that I get to then use when my workers come off that are going to set me up for super turns later on. That tempo is super interesting to me. The asymmetry of the 16 factions are great. I love that every color in the game, every element in the game has sort of an easy side and a complicated side. It makes it, and usually the easy sides are a little more powered, a little not just easier to play, but also potentially a tiny bit stronger, maybe. And maybe that's just because I'm not a strong enough player yet, and the other sides are a little more nuanced. But I like that I can balance the game that way as well, and give myself one of the more complicated ones, and the newer players can take some of the simpler ones, and we're all still feeling quite competitive. It has an amazing solo mode to it, which I will not undersell, and I think this is a game worth owning, even if you were to only play it solo. I think the solo mode got enough attention from the designer that it is a worthy mode to play unto itself. It's very challenging, and it does what I like most about solo games, is that it makes you a better competitive player. It's the exact same game. You're just playing with somebody who's cheating, and you have to figure out how to play so well and take advantage of every single possible advantage that you have. And every resource is super valuable, and every action becomes really important, which is exactly how you become a better player. And I think through the solo game, I have learned to appreciate more that the better I get at this game, the more strategic it becomes, the less tactical it becomes. I will say that I think this is a game that the best player will 9 out of 10 times win at the table, which to me is a good sign for a game with dice in it, and a kind of dice game that I think deserves a place in my collection.
All right. Yeah, so what do the listeners know about me? You know that a fantasy theme does relatively nothing for me. You know that I am not swayed by miniatures. That you would say that that me walking into this game, it's probably not a good fit. Yeah, I still think
I wasn't even going to play it with you. I had no interest in even telling you it existed.
But I appreciate really good design, right? Like I like Terra Mystica. I think Gaia Projects is a way better game, but I think I haven't played Terra Mystica with the expansions. The expansions evidently get it right back into contention. Sure. So I don't have a problem with that, right? I like Caverna. I think it's a good game. So I don't have a problem with that if the game is really good. It's just, for me, from the games that I've played, those aspects, like a fantasy theme plus miniatures, tends to be a game that is not designed in the way that I prefer for games to be. This is a different story. I don't love this game. I will say that this game is a little light for me. You say 3.0. I think that once you get playing it enough, it's a weird thing, right? In terms of playing it well, it's probably 3.2, but in terms of the actual complexity of the game, it's probably only a 2.8. It's really you put a piece out, you get what's there, you're going to convert these resources, and what are you going to do with those resources? Well, you're either going to build a dwelling, you're going to get an action, you're going to get an adventure card, and you're trying to maximize that combination. It's not that difficult. I will say this, that there are a lot of people out there, and I used to be this person that wants to play Euro games, but have a lot of people that are more Amerithrash, right, or Amerigamers, that want to roll some dice and fight some monsters and have that experience. There are few and far between games where both crowds can be happy playing one game. And in that sense, this is a grail game for that. If you have a crowd that has, that you want to play something more Euro, but you have friends that want to play that, I don't understand how you don't buy this game right away. It is perfect for that. And it's perfect for that not in the way... There's some games where you're tricking your friends into playing. Like we have a friend, Ben, not Ben from the podcast, but another Ben, who likes the dice rolling and the miniatures and those kinds of games more than our standard Euro games. And I have played games with him that I've brought him into, and he's enjoyed the game that I introduce him to because it feels at first like it's his kind of game, and then he finds out it's something different. And he still has a good time, but he's been a little hoodwinked, and he kind of knows it, right? This is not that kind of game. This is the kind of game that a person that likes rolling dice and fighting monsters is going to have a blast throughout the entire game. Whether they win or lose, whatever the situation is, they're going to have a great time. A Eurogamer is playing the same game, but they are having a great time because they're playing it their way.
And here's what's fun. I think the Eurogamer is going to crush the Ameritrash gamer.
Oh, completely.
And I think that's going to make the Ameritrash gamer want to play more and improve. And not in a I got beat way, but like, oh, okay, I saw what you were doing there. That's pretty cool.
It might be a thing that teaches Ameritrash gamers how to play Euros.
Exactly,
And
that's what I was saying.
yeah, I think so. I think it very well might be. So that is definitely a place that would belong. I don't know if I'm going to keep this game because I don't have too many people like that anymore. Right? I've either moved on from those folks, or I've converted everyone I can convert. I don't know what the situation is, but. Yeah, like I'm not sure that I'm going to keep it, but listen, I can't say more good things about the design. It is a brilliantly designed medium weight game that is able to attract two radically different audiences into playing the game. So the only reason I will not be keeping it is that I am mostly a heavier Euro gamer, and I just don't see this getting to the table quite enough for it to justify. Also, I have the base version. So as I mentioned, I have the cardboard standees, and those tactics tokens in my game are I think it's just marker on Taco Bell wrappers. I'm not sure why. That's what it was in my set.
Well, here's the bad news also is that this does that thing that I said I don't really like in Kickstarters, where for the most part it was a one-time printing. And it is sold out right now.
Oh, yeah.
And the Kickstarter ended a long time ago. I had to buy mine on the aftermarket, and I feel like I paid a pretty good price because it was before the big review sort of came out for it. But it's not cheap. It is an expensive game. Especially the Legendary Edition is like $200 something. I justified it by doing what I hate that they're doing, which is knowing that it will hold its value because it is going to be very hard to get. So this is unfortunately one of those reviews you're doing where you can't just go to Amazon or your friendly local game shop and get it for a reasonable price. That being said, there is zero chance they don't reprint this through a Kickstarter.
Oh, yeah.
Zero chance. Zero. It's a big hit. They're going to want more money out of it.
It is coming quickly. I'm looking at an eBay listing right now for $500.
Yeah, don't do that, guys. That's crazy.
Yeah.
I paid $50 over retail, and I feel okay about that as opposed to waiting a couple of years or a year, whatever, for the next reprint.
Did I get in? Did I get in before you on this? How did I pay retail?
Because you have the standard.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that's what I have. I have this. I have
the Legendary wasn't even available at retail.
Got it. Yeah. Standard probably I'm not going to get that much for, but that's okay.
Right.
I don't care.
But yeah, go to Breaking Games website. They have a list. I think there's maybe a tiny chance they have a couple that they put up on their website every once in a while for sale. So follow them. They'll mail you if they come back in. But yeah, it's unfortunately not something that if you heard this and got excited, you can just go grab for a price.
Final word from me: if you're a medium weight gamer, If you are a fantasy enthusiast, if you have a group that some people like Euro games and some people like the more dice chucking games, all three of you, this is perfect. This is perfect for you, and it is a very very thoughtful design. So
I'm just curious, if you had to give it a score, what would you put it between 1 to 10?
Oh, see, I can't. So the score I would give it a 9. I think it's like maybe 8.5. Maybe.
Yeah, I was going to say 8.5 is where I'd put it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think 8.5. I think it is a brilliant design. It for me, it's more like a 7.
Right.
But as an objective reviewer, I would say probably 8.5. Yeah. It's a very good design.
It definitely is. Made me take note of everything Luke Laurie's going to do ever again, including his game right now, Cryo.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to just checking that out.
I definitely want to try as well.
Hey, if you enjoyed that video, you very well might enjoy the other videos you now see being suggested to you on screen. Also, we'd greatly appreciate it if you could like, share, or subscribe to our Game Brain channel. Thanks so much.